Hi, debaters. My name is Maggie Berthiaume, and I'm the Director of Debate at Woodward Academy in Atlanta, Georgia. This is the second of 3 videos introducing debaters to the 2025-2026 policy debate topic. The first video was an overview of the Arctic. If you haven't watched that yet, you probably want to do that now. This video will be about U.S. Arctic policy with a special focus on the Trump administration, and then the series will conclude with a discussion of likely arguments on the topic. U.S. Arctic policy. The U.S. became an Arctic state in 1867 when the federal government purchased Alaska from Russia. The deal was orchestrated by Secretary of State William H. Seward. The Americans widely mocked the purchase of what was believed to be an empty, uninhabitable space, calling it Seward's Folly or Seward's Icebox. The decision was redeemed when gold, oil, and other resources were found there. Modern Alaska is about 18% indigenous and hosts 2 million visitors every year. About half of Alaskan residents live in the largest 2 cities, Anchorage and Fairbanks. In 1984, Congress passed the Arctic Research and Policy Act, known as ARPA. It was the foundational legislation about the Arctic and established the Arctic Research Commission, USARC, and interagency Arctic research policies. In 2009, George W. Bush issued National Security and Presidential Directive 66, or NSPD 66. This superseded a 1994 directive and focused on national and homeland security, environmental protection, and sustainable development. It also encouraged cooperation with other countries, including through the Arctic Council. And then in 2022, Biden released the National Strategy for the Arctic Region, or NSAR. It had 4 pillars: climate, security, economic development, international cooperation. But the biggest change from previous policy was a greater focus on climate. The NSAR offered 5 core principles: consulting with indigenous groups, relationships with allies, long-term investments, cross-sector conditions, and evidence-based approaches. U.S. interests in the Arctic can be grouped into 3 main baskets: security. This includes military power projection, the ability to deter Russia and China, and aerospace monitoring, warning, and defense. The U.S. also has environmental interests in the Arctic. Climate change and biodiversity increasingly depend on this vital region. And the U.S. has economic interests: trade routes, oil and gas deposits, and REEs and REMs. A large number of debates on this topic will center on the relative weights of these issues. As you notice, as a result of having a number of different interests in the area, there are a large number of agencies involved in Arctic policy. The U.S. does not have a single agency for Arctic policy. Rather, those 3 different parts of U.S. Arctic policy are housed in a large number of individual agencies, depending on the area and purpose. The Department of State houses the U.S. Arctic Policy Group, which develops and implements U.S. policy. The Department of the Interior manages oil, gas, and minerals. The Department of Commerce houses the NOAA, which does environmental science and climate monitoring. The Department of Homeland Security houses the Coast Guard, which does security and law enforcement. The Environmental Protection Agency does pollution controls. The Department of Defense has a military presence in the area. The National Science Foundation does research and scientific understanding in the region. And the Department of Energy is in charge of energy, science, and security. One thing to note is that the Trump administration has made or is planning to make major cuts to almost all of these agencies, with a particular focus on cuts to the environmental areas. So while these agencies nominally continue to participate in Arctic policy, many of them are much less effective or well-staffed than they were in 2024. For example, Trump has cut about 75% of the NOAA's research budget. This will be an important area to continue to monitor as we head for tournament debates in the fall. The Department of Defense announced a new Arctic strategy in July 2024. A lot of the strategy was geared around new opportunities and concerns related to climate change. It had 3 main goals. First, enhancing domain awareness and capabilities in the Arctic, as well as surveillance, intelligence, and reconnaissance abilities. Second, increasing cooperation with allies and partners, including expanded joint training missions. And third, exercising calibrated presence in the region. In the context of this report, it mostly meant expanding presence. As of now, Alaska has about 21,000 troops stationed there and also about 5,000 National Guard members and reservists. There are also about 150 Air Force and Space Force personnel stationed at Bidufik Spaceport. If Trump continues the DoD plans, both of these numbers are expected to grow. During the first Trump administration, the Arctic wasn't a big focus. In fact, Trump scrapped Biden's plans to build new Coast Guard icebreakers to move that funding to building a wall on the U.S.-Mexico border. But there were some notable changes during his administration as well. First, he opened the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, or ANWR, ANWR, to oil and gas drilling. This was challenged in court and ultimately reversed by the Biden administration. He also first mentioned his desire to purchase Greenland in 2019. We'll discuss Trump's Greenland policy in more detail in the next section. And finally, he stymied the Arctic Council by refusing to sign on to any agreement that mentioned the existence of climate change. Trump tends to see Greenland and Canada and also NATO as free riders. During his first administration, he pushed heavily for NATO members to spend more on their own defense. In terms of Greenland, Trump is interested in geographical dominance and seems to think that if the U.S. is going to invest money in having bases there, we should get its natural resources. Greenland is rich in REEs, but production is currently low. They also banned uranium mining in 2021. Russia and China are watching these moves carefully. Some experts think that they might appreciate Trump policy just because it's more similar motives to theirs. In 2019, Trump floated the idea of buying Greenland in advance of a planned visit. Denmark's prime minister referred to the idea as, quote, absurd, causing Trump to abandon the visit. Recently, Denmark has said that the U.S. can expand their bases in Greenland, but they are still opposed to U.S. acquisition. A March 2025 survey of Greenlanders found 85% opposed to joining the U.S. This was also reflected in the results of the recent elections, where the coalition elected is firmly opposed. Vice President Vance visited Greenland in March and tried to reassure Greenlanders that the U.S. was not planning to invade. But he did also say that they should join the U.S. Also in April, Trump said that acquiring Greenland was now official U.S. policy. He floated the idea that the U.S. would give $10,000 to each Greenland citizen to purchase it. Denmark suggested sending troops to Greenland and possibly instituting a military draft there, but Greenland has declined. They don't have or want their own military. The U.S. currently has 2 icebreakers. For context, Russia has 41 and China has 4 and is building more. The U.S. CGC Healy is a medium-sized icebreaker that belongs to the Coast Guard. It was commissioned in 1999. It's been to the North Pole 4 times. It had an engine fire in 2020 that took a year to fix, and then a second fire in July 2024. The U.S. CGC Polar Star is a Coast Guard heavy icebreaker. It was initially commissioned in 1976 and then was recommissioned in 2012. It's actually smaller than the Healy, but can operate independently in the Antarctic, whereas the Healy needs assistance from the Polar Star. It goes to Antarctica once a year to resupply McMurdo Base there. But ultimately, it's almost 50 years old and needs to be decommissioned soon. In April, the Russian Navy announced the arrival of their ice-breaking patrol. They have their first warship with an ice-resistant hull. The U.S. is now contracting with Finnish shipyard RMC to build up to 8 for the United States, about 3 to 5 medium and 3 large icebreakers. The GOP Congress also submitted a funding proposal in early May for 30 new icebreakers, including 5 new polar ones. The proposal recommends doubling the Coast Guard budget to accomplish this, but it has to be passed through Congress. This is definitely an area that's evolving quickly, and it's worth keeping an eye on as we head into the season. In April, tariffs came to the Arctic. Trump instituted tariffs on Canada, Norway, Iceland, and Sweden. These are now on pause, but it remains to be seen if they'll be instituted. Confusingly, Svalbard, Norway, which doesn't trade with the U.S., and Jan Mayen, an uninhabited island that doesn't trade with anyone, were both named in the orders. There have also been debates about whether to drill in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge in northern Alaska since at least the 1970s. ANWR is the largest protected wilderness area in the United States. Trump authorized drilling in his first administration. Then Biden reversed the leases and process. But on his first day in office for his second term, President Trump declared the area open for exploration via executive order. The other area you can see on this map is the National Petroleum Reserve in Alaska, or NPRA. It's owned by the United States federal government and managed by the Department of the Interior. In 2023, Biden approved leases to begin drilling in the NPRA. Trump seems likely to continue this project. The Department of the Interior is also looking into a new wave of oil and gas exploration, some in the Arctic areas. The first step is public input, a 45-day process. Then it would be about a 5-year plan to build new sites. Keep an ear out for details on this as we head toward the season. As a reminder, this is part 2 of 3. Part 3 will focus on AF and neg arguments on the topic. In the meantime, happy debating.